It is officially 1:45. We will get going, okay? Is that all right with you? That we will get going with the class. And now we're really going to do the real history part of this class. Now we know a little about the background. First thing I will do, however, is go over the test. I know. Test is not anybody's favorite thing, but here you go. Here's how it turned out. Bell curve shows that it's fair. Now, the way Canvas works is when I curve it, and I will, you move up this average. So not everybody's, I'll probably move up the average to like a 75 or a 77, which means not everybody is going to get 7 or 8 points. Everybody's going to get some, but it's not all going to be the same. That's just the way Canvas does it. Anyway, but I will curve it up. I just wanted to show you where you were going in. Now, I've had some people ask about grades, whatnot. We have an essay due this week. I grade those pretty easy. But yeah, tests make you think. Unlike a lot of teachers, I've actually taken education courses. I know how to create a test. If you get every question wrong, if I have a question everybody gets wrong, it's a bad question. If I get one that everybody gets right, that means you're not really getting tested. So it is a fair test. Anyway, we'll go over the questions quickly. Again, most people did fine. History inevitably follows that avoids interpretation false. You have to put some questions in it. Context, whoop. This is where you find fees and copyrights in archives, and that's really straight out of the book. That one's good. This one was close. Should always, this is a hard one. Should always be unbiased. Little hint in multiple tests, multiple choice tests, anytime you see the word always, it's a wrong answer. So it's definitely false. And that's a trick for future reference. And it can't be unbiased. We all make subjective decisions in our presentations. That's one, that's a big one. Okay, soundness, straight from the book. Causation, you can't tell, there's lots of stuff. Cause and effect, this one was good. Bias, yep. Copyright, got that. See, most of the people got them mostly right. Interpretation is necessary to understand the facts. You have to interpret. Inaccuracies and typos, again, got that. Truth should be based on factual information. Yes. Is never biased? No, there's always some bias. Narrative is best to avoid bias. No, it introduces bias, but it also makes it interesting. Narrative writing makes you pick and choose facts. It can be used in fiction or nonfiction. So that was a little bit of a challenge. Narrative, necessary to give context, are usually too biased to be accurate. Everything's biased. So necessary to give context. We said that in class and in the book. I mean, bias is a hard thing for y'all to deal with. And that's okay. Because, you know, again, we're always making subjective choices. And that's one thing I want you to get out of the course. Focuses on primary because it's the single best, and there's many ways to understand, not just primary research. Yep, got that. Copyright, you got. Referee, that's right. Yeah, I mean, this one was a little close. Library yield authoritative good sources. You can find primary and secondary at the library. Whoop. Theories. Ooh, this is one that we went over. It's not all of these. Sex is a topic. It is not a theory. Violence is a topic. You could apply agenda setting or other theories to explain sex or violence. But this is the only thing that is a real theory, was agenda setting. The idea that you read something in the media and that tells you what's important and what's not, that can help you understand sex and violence, but it is not a theory. So we talked a lot, and I even had a video on theory. Theory has something, and this is interesting, supported by previous research. You could repeat it back from the book, but you can't identify a theory yourself. So it's something to work on. Narrow focus topic is necessary. Wikipedia, yeah, bibliography is okay. Theory, again, you could talk about what a theory is, but you can't really identify one. So it is a bit of a challenge of the test. And I will bump it up, but I do, again, this is the first test is usually the hardest. I do like to make you think. You'll do better on the next one, and I will curve this up. This week, we have an assignment to help you improve those grades. 300 words about an ancient media product. Clocks and compasses are not media things. Something that is a media thing that's ancient, that we still use today. Let's say before the invention of the printing press. The Bible counts as an ancient thing, but if you use the Bible, concentrate, don't say the Bible is ancient, because the Bible is many books. You have the Old Testament and the New Testament. You have Gospels, you have Ecclesiastes, you have Revelation. Each book of the Bible has its own story. Use a book, not the whole thing. Describe what it is, why it's important, and history is what we do today. And we'll talk about what media is today. And that is due Friday midnight. I should take drafts. Now, I have had a death in the family, unfortunately. So I may have to go out of town, which means I may not be able to read drafts. If that happens, I'll let you know, and I'll give you an extension on this. So that's what's going on there. So speaking of which, let's talk a little bit about ancient media. Let's actually start doing history. What a concept. What is the media anyway? When you hear the word media, anybody want to give it a stab? All right. Media is, here's some hallmarks. Just in case. Just in case, you know where the
Mass media, like so many of the ideas we use in everyday life, is something that's fairly easy to describe. We tend to know it when we see it, but a bit more difficult to explain.
Living stereo, played on a record, through the all-new 2-in-1 RCA Victor stereo orthophonic high-fidelity Victrolas.
This follows because technological changes over the past 25 to 30 years have created a range of new and different relationships between those who produce and consume media products, such as film, print, music, and television. There have also been dramatic and wide-ranging changes in relation to how media are actually produced and consumed. However, while these ideas are interesting and important, probably a bit more of the latter than the former when you come to think about it, we're getting ahead of ourselves slightly. Before we do anything more, we need to explain what we mean by the mass media. A medium is just a channel of communication. A means, in other words, send and receive messages. A message in this context being any kind of information, from a phone call, through viewing a film, to reading a book. We are, of course, surrounded by very familiar examples of media in our everyday lives. From newspapers and magazines, through television and radio, to film, video, mobile phones and computers. By mass, we're obviously talking about the potential to reach large numbers of people. And while these terms are somewhat imprecise, how many, for example, is a large number, we use the idea of a mass medium, such as television, to differentiate it from other types of media, such as a letter, that simply involve one-to-one, or at best one-to-few, communication. However we actually define the concept of a mass audience, it's not something we need to bother with too much at present, since, as we'll see, it's probably going to be easier to define a mass medium in terms of what it isn't, something greater than a one-to-one or one-to-few medium. We can start to develop this rather bare-bones definition by noting what Dutton has called 4 essential characteristics of a mass medium: distance, technology, scale, and commodification. Taking each of these categories in turn, distance involves the idea that communication between those who send and receive messages is impersonal, lacks immediacy, and is one way.
There you go. For something to be media, you're not in the same room with them. It lacks immediacy. Again, you have it stored and it's one way. So, for example, I get a text from my mom and that's personal. It is one-to-one. It's not a mass audience. So it is not mass media. If we're in the same room, we can interact. So that's also not media.
From the producer stroke distributor of the information to the consumer stroke audience. When you watch a film, for example, no matter how emotionally involved you become in the action, you can't affect what's happening on the screen. Secondly, technology is a crucial ingredient in the mix because mass communication requires a vehicle, such as a television receiver, a method of printing, a computer network, and so forth, that allows messages to be sent and received.
So yes, and you're using a technology, duh. But the real thing is you have a medium. You have something between you and the audience for it to be media. And that thing is a technology. Could be a book. Could be, because it comes from a printing press, a newspaper, a phone. Those can be media.
In terms of scale, one feature of a mass medium is that it involves simultaneous communication with many people. An individual watching a particular TV program, for example, is behavior that's being shared in thousands, if not millions, of other living rooms across the country. Finally, commodification.
Okay. So it is not personal. You have a big audience. How big is big? There's no real definition there. If I get a text from someone trying to sell me something, that's certainly mass media, but a text from one person is not. So it has to be a scale, many copies, has to go to lots of people, a wide audience. I would say our class with 80 people would probably be a big audience.
Involves an interesting feature of mass communication.
I like this.
The idea that it comes at a price.
Commodification. It is a business.
I can watch sport on TV, for example, if I can afford a television, a license fee to watch terrestrial channels like the BBC, ITV, and Channel 4, or a subscription to something like Sky Sports if it's on satellite or cable.
Okay, so what is the media? Uses a medium, a technology from a group to a wide audience, from a group to a wide audience. And I'll leave commodification out of that for this moment, but it is from a group to a wide audience using a technology and a medium. Okay. Here it is, mediated. It's impersonal. To a mass group using a technology. It's from a group. It's impersonal. It is not one-to-one. It is not a group. It is not personal communication. Okay. For the purposes of this course and history, look at this. Actually 37,000 years ago. This is cave paintings. Is this media? Look at people went inside the cave to tell the story of the bear hunt. They went and they hunted bears. So, is that media? There is something between the audience, which is us, and them. It's the cave. And it's been there 35,000 years. It's from a group, it's from the tribe to a mass audience. Look at us using the technology of the cave drawing and paint. Yes, the cave painting is media. This is different. Now, the Neanderthals, they made art, they had sculptures, but they didn't tell stories. These guys, this tribe sat in the cave and said, we went out and we hunted that gosh darn big old bear. We are the only creature that needs to tell a story. That atavistic need to say, I exist. It is something uniquely human. Okay. The next thing that happened for the next couple of hundred years, next couple of thousand years, whoops, we'll go back to playing itself. You had cave paintings, you had assorted things, but why did you need writing? Anybody? That's the next, from painting to writing. It's that final part of the video when they talk about commodification. You needed writing because you needed business, and the media has always been a business.
My favorite thing about my Squarespace is seeing all my pieces together.
On this show, we often talk about the history of people or places, societies. Rarely do we get to talk about the history of an idea. So today we're going to try an experiment. We're going to talk about the history of the concept of the written word. Writing is one of mankind's most enduring technologies. For 5,600 years, this ability to transmit thoughts over generations, to give instructions, to express ourselves, to communicate ideas over the gulf of space and time, has allowed us to make vast strides in our understanding of the universe, our understanding of each other, and our understanding of ourselves. But to understand how writing began, we have to travel back to ancient Sumer, where the first widespread use of writing started. Look around, what do you see? Yes, you see the potters and the merchants, you see streets and gardens, but what do you see looming over all of it? The temples. These temples play a huge part in why writing began. For you see, Sumer was the land of the world's first real cities, not hundreds of people or thousands of people, but tens of thousands grouped together. And these cities formed city-states, bound together by the veneration of a specific set of gods. The people mastered irrigation, and the cities grew. And as the cities grew, so too did the temples to the gods. But these massive, sprawling temple complexes didn't serve only as houses of worship. No, look close. Do you see the men bringing in the clay pitchers full of grain? These temples also served as enormous warehouses, repositories for the vast wealth of the city. In good times, donations and gifts would come flooding in, and in lean times, they would be distributed back out. This system created vast wealth for the priests, but it also ensured that cities of this size could function. But we're not concerned with that, not directly. Look next to the men bringing in the grain. Do you see that man watching them? Notice how every time they bring in a jar of grain, he makes a little mark on that clay tablet he's holding. With an economy of this size, with tons of supplies moving in and out of the temple each day, they needed to keep records somehow, and that is exactly what he's doing. That tablet will later be stored so that priests can know what exactly they have on hand in their giant temple warehouse. But as much as tally marks have their place in the origin of writing, there's something far more interesting for us on that wet piece of clay he's got in his hands. You see, he's drawn a little picture of a grain stalk next to his tally marks, so it's clear that his tallies refer to grain. Well, over the generations, that nice little drawing of grain would get simpler, more abstracted. Scribes looking for quicker and easier ways to note common goods wouldn't laboriously draw every single item coming into the temple, but instead came to an agreed upon set of more symbolic representations for the goods flowing into the holy places. And you can see how somebody might quickly realize that those symbols could represent not only the concept of something, but the word itself. And that's exactly what happened. The symbol for a cow came to be understood not only as a representative of the animal, but also of the word cow itself. But still, there's not much you can do with just a set of 1,000 or so nouns. And here's where a happy accident of linguistics comes in. You see the people talking around the temple? Well, if you could hear them, it would sound like everybody was just saying the same few words over and over again. And that's because Sumerian is a language where most of the words are just single syllables and where concepts are built out of putting words together. Both of those points are important because when many of your words are monosyllables, it's easy to go from thinking of a symbol as a word to thinking of it as a sound for that word. To go from thinking of the symbol for the U, meaning just the sheep, to thinking of it as meaning the sound U, and thus giving you the word for the tree U or the person U. Once you do this, you're no longer drawing pictures for every word in the language. Now you're starting to think of those pictures as sounds, and stringing sounds together lets you build up all sorts of words. And once you couple that with the fact that in Sumerian, many concepts were built up out of basic words, so for example, sickle plus grain might mean harvest, there's a huge amount you can do with the concepts and sounds that 1,000 or so images represent. But we're not done yet, because the very medium the scribes were writing on changed how we write in the West today. You remember how our buddy in the temple tallying the grain was making his marks on a clay tablet? Well, watch him write. See how he's writing from top to bottom, just as you would if you were making a list. Well, that would soon change because the problem with clay is that it takes forever to dry. And so if you accidentally set your hand down while you're writing from top to bottom, you could easily obliterate whole sections of the column you just wrote. But this risk is reduced if you start writing from left to right. But a lot of the people in the temple didn't like that innovation. It was easier on the scribes, but for the other literate folks who had to read it, they had learned to read from top to bottom, and so they didn't like this sideways thing at all. So what did the scribes do? Well, they simply rotated all of the characters 90 degrees so that a person could turn the tablet and read it from top to bottom just like they always had. Soon, people were just reading the sideways characters left to right. But because they'd been flipped, now they were even more abstracted, even further from the pictures and the things that they originally represented. This writing system was then adopted by the neighboring Akkadians and Elamites, who abstracted it even further. Determinatives, or little markers to designate what part of speech something was in case it was ambiguous, also got added. And now you got a real writing system. The original pictures and even the pictograms they became vanished entirely into wedge-shaped impressions and line strokes made by the stylus favored at the time, which means instead of simply a handful of nouns to record storage lists, we have a system for writing that can give us things as abstract and lyrical as the Epic of Gilgamesh or the Enuma Elish. So how do we know all this? Well, funny thing about clay, when a place is burned down and all of your writing is on clay, rather than it being destroyed, the writing hardens and becomes preserved. But that won't happen here for some time, so let's just celebrate what scribes like this one and the marvelous city of Sumer gave us, a gift that has lasted us more than 5,500 years, writing. Now, since we don't get to do the lies episodes for these one-offs, I also want to point out that this is just the first place in history where writing achieved widespread use. Later, it would be developed independently in Mesoamerica, and was almost certainly developed independently in China. There's a great deal of contention about whether it developed independently in the Indus Valley and Egypt, although from what we've read, which admittedly isn't nearly enough to form anything more than a layman's opinion, I'm more in the camp that both of these groups inherited the basic concept from Sumer. Anyway, let us know in the comments if you liked this little experiment and are as interested in the history of ideas as the history of societies and people.
Interesting stuff. But it all came down to business. You needed to keep track of your business. It's always been there. Here you go. Code of Hammurabi, laws, first peace treaty, first love poem. These are things I actually saw in a museum in Turkey. Then the next thing, from writing to the alphabet. And the difference there is the spoken word, the phonetic alphabet. It's not just in your head, it's something you could sound out. That makes a huge difference.
Informally, we can think of information as some message stored or transmitted using some medium. When you paint, you are representing your message using a continuous pattern with a seemingly endless number of possible forms. You are free to express yourself. When humans began developing writing systems, we naturally had to divide our world into a finite number of atomic units, which we express using symbols. Now, any written language can be thought of in this way. Messages are formed by arranging symbols in specific patterns. Let's return to 3000 BC and explore two ancient writing systems. First, in ancient Egypt, we had hieroglyphics, a priestly form of communication reserved for governmental, fiscal, magical, and religious purposes. It was practiced by a select few writers known as scribes, and writing was generally unintelligible to the common people. The symbols themselves broadly fall into two categories. Word signs, which are symbols that represent a single meaningful concept.
Bat. Apple.
And sound signs. These symbols represent chunks of sound. Now, the total number of different symbols in common use was over 1,500. And if you divide all of these symbols into word signs versus sound signs, we find a much smaller portion of sound signs. There were around 140 sound signs, and of these, only 33 represented distinct consonants, a tiny fraction of all of the symbols in use. At the time, the medium used to store the symbols was primarily rock, and this was ideal for durable inscriptions, allowing messages to travel into the future. Mobility was not a main concern when communicating messages in this way. However, a new physical medium for storing symbols was emerging at the time. Along the Nile, silt deposits left from flooding made the surrounding land extremely fertile, and one of the many crops they grew was papyrus. It could be sliced into strips, and these strips were then soaked and weaved together and finally pressed, allowing the natural sugars to act as glue. After several days, it dried and formed an almost weightless tablet. This medium was ideal for sending messages across greater spaces rather than the more durable inscriptions focused on time. Now, this shift towards cheap, portable mediums for storing symbols coincided with the spread of writing into the hands of more people for new purposes. Gradually, as people began to write more on papyrus, the symbols evolved to suit more rapid writing. This led to a cursive script known as hieratic. For example, here is the world's oldest surviving surgical document. It's written in hieratic script, dated to around 1600 BC. Now, these symbols were based on hieroglyphics. However, the pictures were simplified to match the swiftness of writing, an ancient shorthand. Also, the number of common symbols in use began to shrink down to around 700. By escaping from the heavy medium of stone, thought gained lightness. A marked increase in writing by hand was accompanied by the secularization of writing, thought, and activity. This led to a new writing system called demotic, around 650 BC, which was devised specifically to facilitate the ease of rapid writing. For example, this text is known as a marriage contract and is one of the earliest known examples of demotic script. It's interesting to notice that there was a dramatic reduction again in the total number of symbols with this new system, roughly 10% of the total number of symbols used before. This was due to a shift towards the use of phonetic symbols or sound signs over word symbols or meaning signs. And the new simplicity meant that children could be taught to write at a young age. We see this same pattern in other cultures. Let's return back to 3.
Now, couple interesting things. Here's Egypt, and here is Sumeria over here. What do you have in the middle? We have the Holy Land. Greece is over here. So again, when we talk about biblical history, one of the reasons why Moses's works, the first 5 books, survived, they were written down because they had writing that they took from Egypt and Sumeria.
3000 BC and visit Mesopotamia, where cuneiform was the writing system originally used for fiscal purposes, as it was a powerful method of tracking debt and surplus commodities before the invention of coins. For example, here is a document recording someone's stock of animal hides, and this type of writing evolved to suit other needs. For example, this tablet contains a recipe for bread and beer.
Beer is one of the things that is a mark of civilization. You collect grain, water gets in the grain, it ferments, it drips out, you got beer. Beer is one of the things that shows we're civilized. And I will probably be civilized a little later this evening.
And here's another tablet which contains a legal document. Now, originally, the writing system was used by the Sumerians, and there were over 2,000 different symbols in use, which could also be divided into word signs and sound signs. Akkadian gradually replaced Sumerian as the spoken language, and here is the earliest known dictionary from 2300 BC. It contains word lists in Sumerian and Akkadian, and this was discovered in modern Syria. When it was adapted by the Akkadians and fitted to their language, they reduced the number of symbols to around 600. And they did this again by moving towards sound signs. Again, we see both hieroglyphics and cuneiform using several hundred sound symbols in their more evolved forms. And as writing systems escaped their formal usage and spread to more and more people, the soil was ripe for the invention of a brand new writing system for the people. One of the great discoveries in the history of writing is dated to around 1700 BC. The Sinai inscriptions were found in the Sinai Peninsula, and they were about 20 feet apart. This was important because each picture denotes a consonant sound and no word signs are used. When sounded out correctly, the letters would produce words in ancient Semitic. Although not fully deciphered, this message appears to be of the form name, rank, and prayer. The two words deciphered are chief and God. This innocent example was part of a writing revolution, creating meaning by merging sound signs only.
Apple.
By 1000 BC, we arrive at the Phoenician alphabet, which emerges along the Mediterranean, used by the Phoenicians, who were a maritime trading.
The Phoenicians were right here. Syria, Lebanon. They invented the alphabet. That's why we call it phonetic. You can sound out the alphabet. You could sit and you could not just sit and read, you could tell your friends. And again, what's right here is the land of the Israelites, who obviously knew how to write. They took that down. We call the Jews the people of the book because they are among the first writers in civilization. And then you have the Greeks. This is also where Homer lived. Was Greek territory. And you have the Iliad and the Odyssey. These are things that survive with us today because they were written down and spoken.
In culture. The Phoenician writing system was based on the principle that one sign represents one consonant, and it was used to write a Northern Semitic language containing only 22 symbols total. These symbols chosen to represent these sounds were often borrowed from hieroglyphic pictures so that the letter's name began with the letter's sound. For example, Mem, which stood for water, became what we know of as the letter M. Alf, which stood for ox, became what we know of as the letter A. But the secret power of this alphabet, unknown to its inventors, was that it did not need Semitic speech in order to work.
D, A, E, I, U.
With modest adjustments, these miraculous letters would be fitted to diverse tongues of Europe, India, and Southeast Asia, carrying literacy around the globe. This was the source of the Greek and later Roman alphabet forms we know today. The idea of an alphabet is a powerful method for transmitting.
So there you go, from writing word pictures to an alphabet. And an alphabet you could use in many languages. The alphabet we have, the Roman alphabet, is used in Spanish, French, and German. So with the alphabet, you can transmit your culture, laws, myths. More people can write all the time. And as history goes on, you get ideas. And sometimes kings and scribes and pharaohs don't like ideas. So it is a battle between literacy and ideas throughout history. So which brings us to this week's assignment. Find something from the old days that we still use. We have some examples already. You can email me for topics, and that's what we do for our next essay. And I promise to, since we went over this, to scale up the test. Any questions? I appreciate your participation. I enjoy doing these little shows, and you guys have been super. Let me know if I can help in any way, shape, or form. Any other questions? Don't see anything in the chat. Otherwise, have a good afternoon, and I will post the video shortly. Have a great day.
Thank you, you as well.
Thank you.